cracking down on illegal immigration. I'm sure you've heard that before. It was a hallmark of his campaign, making America safe again. In fact, border crossings are down. Yet, a new report suggests he sent fewer Mexicans back to their country between January and December of this year compared to President Obama did during the same time in 2016. Now, President Trump, as you know, is working hard at keeping Mexicans from crossing over illegally in the first place. He hinted last week he'll make a trip soon to our southern border over to San Diego to look at prototypes for his proposed wall. He's going to ultimately make the choice. They're going to be about 30 feet high. And then we'll see if they're going to do something below because we've got a little tunnel problem. Kennedy,
yes.
What does this study say to you that we've actually had less Mexican apprehensions in 2017 than 2016?
Well, you also had fewer illegal border crossings. So the president did some very good messaging. It was very effective, good marketing when he was running for president, in that, fewer people came into this country illegally. And also it shows that the president has a much bigger heart than President Obama, who was absolutely awful about deporting people and ripping families apart. And it's laughable that he reached out to the Latino community the way he did, because he was incredibly heartless with his deportations. And President Trump has actually softened there and looked for other ways to try and solve the immigration crises we face in this country.
Marie, it turns out I had a chance to go down to the border 2 weeks ago, and they do think the beginning of the wall will be built in the Rio Grande Valley sector area, where it is indeed the worst. But the word came out in the first half of the year that we're cracking down, and it slowed down. In the second half of the year, when we didn't do anything policy-wise because Congress couldn't get their act together, it picked up again. And then you have these numbers overall. What does it tell you?
Well, I think we will see how big President Trump's heart is as we deal with DACA in the new year. I mean, as we look at 2018, that's the biggest immigration fight we're going to have, I think, pretty early on. The numbers are interesting. I'm not sure exactly what to make of them. I think fewer people are coming here. They've arrested more immigrants, but they have deported fewer back to Mexico. So I think we'll see. When it comes to the wall, though, I do not predict that President Trump will be able to build a wall across the entire border. I think he will find places where he can put up a structure so he can go take a photo with it, say he's kept his promise. Because in some of these places, I think the landowners aren't going to want to give up their land. They very much don't want the government coming in some of these places and taking their land to build a wall.
Long, costly, eminent domain battle.
Exactly. This is going to be an eminent domain battle that I don't think everyone is focused on enough.
Why wouldn't a property owner want a wall? You put the wall up there. I mean, they don't want people illegal crossings on their property, right?
But if you go back, Texas especially, this is an issue because there are families who were actually property owners and landowners before Texas became a state and part of the United States of America. And so the culture there is a little bit different in terms of how they deal with the issue. However, that does not mean that they don't want border security, that they don't want Border Patrol to be on their property, working with Border Patrol to make sure that people aren't crossing back and forth. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want their ranches divided by a big wall. So there is going to be a very big battle there. In terms of the numbers, not all illegal immigrants in this country are Mexicans. In fact, only 50% of them are. The rest are other than Mexican. And one of the big problems that we have, too, is visa overstays. There are 54 million people who come into the country every year. 700,000 of them tend to stay behind.
That's absolutely
Interior enforcement is an issue. And under Obama, he was called the deporter-in-chief. But the way that they measured that number was you catch people at the border and immediately deport them. And they counted that as a deportation. That's not going into communities and rounding people up and deporting them. They were counting people coming across, turning themselves into Border Patrol, and then getting kicked back out as a deportation. And that's why that number was so high.
That's a great point. And I think this, Tom, one thing is also clear. It's not just Mexicans. In fact, Central America and South America, depending on where the poorest areas are, Mexico's going, yeah, you can keep going. If you can come in as long as
they don't want them to stay there.
They keep going.
Yes, that's
so it's really not Mexico right now that is the problem. That's the sense among the Border Patrol. But keep in mind, too, the fear of drugs, fentanyl in particular, coming across the southern border is very real. They think that is picking up, too.
Yeah, well, the fact that you have fewer people being deported should be celebrated. The headlines in the paper, Trump sends home fewer Mexicans despite deportation talk. Another headline, Donald Trump deporting fewer people, and then it says rhetoric versus reality.
As if he was just targeting Mexicans for deportation.
Yes, and the fact that it's empty talk. It's not empty talk.
No.
If your tough talk makes fewer people come across the border, the headline should be Trump immigration policy working.
Right. No, absolutely. The other thing that they're working on, I believe it's going to happen in January, Kennedy, they're going to start talking about if they're going to come together on anything, it's going to be immigration.
Yeah.
Evidently, there's a bipartisan committee in the Senate meeting right now that are going to be attacking chain migration because I believe there's sentiment on both sides to attack it. The lottery as well, and DACA, you mix it in with border security. Could this be our first joint legislation since the early 20s?
Yeah, it's interesting because people's feelings about immigration tend to evolve with some of the facts, reality, and news that happens. And, you know, whether it's Kate Steinle's death, which certainly galvanized on the right, or some of the terror incidents, which, you know, reach across party lines, and people start to go, well, I'm wondering about the kind of people that are in my community, and how do we keep the country safer while still attracting the very best people in the world to come and work at businesses and help take care of families and participate in the economy. I mean, that's ultimately what you want. So the question is, how do we fix immigration to keep bad people out without compromising our civil liberties?
Marie,
and that's a big goal. It's the ultimate goal. But I think actually Republicans and Democrats are much closer on that because people essentially want the same thing. They want the country to be safe. They want the best and brightest people here. And they realize that the system is broken on several ends. You know, visas and visa overstays that Katie talked about. We have to fix the visa system. And Democrats have to live up to the promises that they made on border security 11 years ago.
Marie, tell me where the no-go zone is. And I believe I have not heard it yet, except for build the wall, which Senator Schumer does not want to give President Trump this victory. He might give in, but I have not heard him object to chain migration. And the lottery system being re-examined. So, and DACA, of course, the president said, listen, I'm kind of into getting this done by March. So do you think that they're actually, we might be 2/3 of the way there, or am I dreaming?
No, I think we actually, you're wide awake. You're not totally dreaming. I think we might be close. Jeff Flake tweeted that there will be a DACA bipartisan bill come to the Senate floor after the new year. I think that was something he got in exchange for being a yes on tax reform or as part of a conversation. Chuck Schumer was part of the Gang of Eight who talked about ending chain migration. Right. This is something that Democrats are absolutely open to talking about. If that's the package that gets put together earlier in the new year, because the closer you get to November, the harder it becomes.
Right.
If we can do that, I absolutely think we can get a bipartisan agreement.
I think she's right. I think if you are able to tackle DACA and the Dreamers and take care of things like chain migration and the lottery system, and you don't fold amnesty into it, then
But that's going to be a really big challenge because the details of DACA are going to be hard to work out. What is the threshold in terms of the timing for when you were brought here, and do you get to stay? 66% of the illegal immigrants in this country have been here for more than 10 years, which means the rest of them have only been here for 5. That's a lot of people who are going to be looking for some kind of form of amnesty, and it ultimately doesn't solve the question of what do we do with the people who are here, because they're not all dreamers. And let's not forget that Barack Obama's dreamer policy caused an influx of unaccompanied minors, caused a huge crisis, and that is a potential to happen again if they aren't careful about the way that they debate the legislation.
Tom, you're in a tough spot because you were going to use chain migration to bring more Shalloos across the border. And now you realize public sentiment, and this table has turned against you. What happens to the other Shalloos?
Shalloos are going to do just fine because they do have merits.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
You bring something to the table.
You change chain migration. We don't need chain migration.
Right.
The Shalloos can come here because they're highly skilled.
All right, fine.
They get mad skills.
That's the criteria.
Yes.
And plus you can sing and dance.
Triple threat.
That's absolutely true. I think it's true in the big picture. This is the one thing I fear because I think we're all tired of this. Conservatives will say, you better not do a deal on DACA. And Democrats said, you can't do a deal with Trump. We got the Republicans on their back. If you let Trump stand up and look like a consolidator, a deal maker, there goes the midterm elections.
But I think we're confident enough in what we're running on. We need DACA. And actually, to Kennedy's point, the fact that so many Republicans have come out in support of DACA and getting it fixed and done is stunning.
Not alone.
No, not alone. But is such a sea change from where we were even a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That's why I think this is going to get this done. These 800,000 dreamers, I do think both sides of the aisle want to find a compromise. They don't all get kicked out.
Can I just say, though, that the illegal immigration system in this country is also severely broken. Legal,
yeah.
Right. And I believe it is unfair that we are focusing on the illegal immigration reform of this problem before we are focusing on the legal reform, because people wait 5, 10, 15 years to come to this country legally.
Yeah, because
they pay thousands of dollars.
Right.
And they're currently using the fees that the legal immigrants are paying for DACA and the Dreamers that were here before. That is the money that was used under Obama, and that's how he got away with doing it and not going through Congress. And so I do think we have to rethink our priorities. DACA is one that a lot of people can agree on, but there are bigger immigration problems with putting Americans first that the president campaigned on that I think should be kept first.
I'm a part of the soccer community, which prides itself on internationals, and they are kind of angry at the whole talk of DACA because they go through the green card system for the most part, and they're waiting their 10 years, paying their fees, and they'll say, wait a second, what about us?
But there's a difference, and this is where I give people credit for having a more subtle and nuanced conversation about immigration, because they realize it's really heartless to deport people if this is the only home they've ever known, and that's the basis for the argument for protecting Dreamers. But also, at the same time, having said that, then you don't create the influx. You kind of close the door, and that's when you fix the immigration system. And I don't think you shut down the number of visas. I think you do a better job of vetting people and allow people in who are good people who are going to work hard. What is the metric for that? How do you vet for that? I don't know. I don't know if anyone has the answer.
Well, maybe
this is another big question, too. You look at DACA and the Dreamers, right? And we talk about not breaking up families. Well, guess what? Dreamers all have families. And if their parents are illegal immigrants, which many of them are, because ICE has delivered children to their parents in this country, have been living here illegally for years, what do you do with their family? Do they automatically get amnesty? Do they get to stay? What is their status? And so that's a very tough question, because you can argue if you pass through DACA, the entire family by default gets to stay because we're not a heartless country that deports and breaks up families. And that is something that's difficult to deal with, because that is amnesty for everybody.
Do you guys know what I'm doing right now?
What?
I'm crossing at the A block. We have just done a great job starting the show.
Really
it is now done. And all the pressure
goes... You would make such a good teacher.
Thank you very much.
You would.
And all the pressure is about to go on your shoulders, young lady, to match that, okay? Hey, coming up next at 12 minutes after the hour, President Trump still getting slimed by many in the media, but it doesn't seem to matter anymore. Why? We'll explain.
As a mother, set my boy free.
All the money in the world is being hailed as a masterpiece. Rolling Stone calls it one hell of a ride.
We've all got Saturday Night Fever on a Thursday. That's how good it is. President Trump has been fighting a long war against the media, as you know. He's convinced the press is out to get him. A new poll does seem to support his conclusion. A Pew survey determined media coverage in his first 60 days in office was about 3 times more negative than President Obama received, about 2 times more negative than Presidents Bush and Clinton. Mr. Trump's approval rating, however, is on par with Obama's in his first year, so the people may not be so influenced by the negative press. Does it surprise you, Brian, that he
Give me a second to compose myself.
You thought it was all quite positive because the president is a huge fan of Fox and Friends, where you broadcast every morning from 6 to 9 a.m. on the Fox News channel.
Right, and 90%.
All times Eastern.
Thank you very much, Kennedy, and you've been on before, too, wearing something totally different.
No, I wear the same drab gray dress every day.
Different earrings?
I'm just,
different accessories.
Just trying to add some color. So I will say this. There's no doubt about it. The negative coverage has been so overwhelming, it's almost comical. In fact, I used those last few days when I had time off to reflect. I flip channels, and I listen on Sirius, and I listen. I'm amazed at how the president is actually programming 3 other networks by his tweets. They are so outraged by what he says, they book guests around what he's tweeting in the morning and throw their whole rundown in the street about it. So he's playing into it. I get that. But it's so overwhelmingly negative. What they're not understanding is they have never come across, either have I, a fighter like this. He fights every story that he doesn't like and feels is incorrect every single day. That's why people say, I'm exhausted.
But the danger is, Marie, that he can come off as thin-skinned.
Yes.
But at the same time, Brian's right, it doesn't seem to hurt him. You know, as much as the press tries to subtly and overtly take him down and sort of misproduce the coverage, it doesn't really have the intended effect.
Well, we'll see, right? I mean, his poll numbers, his approval rating All of his numbers are historically low for a first-term president. They are lower than anyone else since we've started modern polling. He has kept his base, which is about 30 to 33%, but that's not enough to win elections. So we will see if all of the negativity surrounding his presidency, both
does he cause the negativity? Is it because he picks
I was just going to say both of his own making, both of his own making, and some of the media coverage. We'll see if that has an impact in 2018 when he's not on the ballot, but his party is, and we'll see how that impacts senators who he needs to get legislation passed that are also running this year. We'll see. I think it's still an open question, but he does bring a lot of it on himself.
Tom?
And he likes that. He likes the fight, I think.
I think people like the fight, too. He is like Toto, pulling back the curtain, and the entire establishment and everything has been pulling the reins and pretending they're the Wizard of Oz.
Who's
and now
the
we're
wizard?
seeing
Ooh.
that they're not, that the media, the establishment, they're all, there's nothing there. And so he exposes them for what they are, including this 5% of positive stories for Trump, where headlines like "President wins the election despite losing the popular vote." Like that's as positive as it gets.
Right.
For him. But now we trust the mainstream media less, and I think that ends up being a good thing.
Well, Katie, it's interesting because we were reading some articles this morning before Outnumbered, when the three of us were on the couch together joyfully. And it's interesting because even when you have a story from The Hill or Politico or the New York Times that talks about some of the economic success that the president is enjoying right now, it also points out that, Wall Street is not correlated with any sort of presidential edict or influence. And, and that's when they kind of go subtly out of the way to say, but Obama, during his first year, he was so magical. Everything was wonderful.
I don't know if it's so subtle
The world fell
anymore,
apart, and he fixed it with presidential super glue.
Yeah, well, as someone who has a journalism degree, I will say, as I said earlier, there's always going to be a tension between the government and the press. That is the entire purpose of a unbiased media. However, that being said, that's not the territory we're playing in anymore. Every headline is politicized. Everything is a fight. And honestly, it really is lazy journalism. For them to throw all of their headlines to focus entire newspapers around tweets means that they're not actually doing the digging. They're not doing the real investigative work that they need to be doing on big topics. We've seen them really screwing up big reports with anonymous sourcing about major Russia bombs that have repeatedly had to be retracted or corrected. So I think they need to take a step back. They've said this, many of them themselves, to just kind of regather themselves, think about what their priorities are in a story, and take back their liberal bias a little bit and not let their positions on the policies affect the way that they go after the facts.
Okay, one of the comments that you made earlier today, Marie, was, in being a spokesperson at the State Department and for the former president, it doesn't feel like the press is fair. It's like from where we sit, the New York Times and other institutions, very kind and glowing toward President Obama and Secretary Clinton. But do you think that the way the press covers the president now, is it going to be the same level of scrutiny for the next Democratic president?
Probably. I think so.
You really think so? I think that they're going to keep that Brian shaking his head.
Well, it depends on who it is. But Hillary Clinton certainly got as much scrutiny. Let's look at all of the Hillary Clinton stories we've talked about over the last year. I do want to give one little shout out to the reporters, though, who have done a good job this year. And we have had stories that have broken major news, whether it's on the Russia investigation or other topics. There are reporters who are doing a good job. The problem is when news outlets don't, when they have to retract stories, when they have to correct stories, that makes it harder for everyone else. So let's focus on the good journalists and try and make the bad ones better.
Will there ever be a healing of this rift between the presidency and the press, and is that necessary? Or should the press be as harsh with every administration as they are with this one?
Well, it would be nice if they were, but as you said, President Obama, he got treated with kid gloves, but he still wants to go back to the old days of Walter Cronkite. Did you see him the other day with the Prince? He says, I wish we still,
2, 4, and 7.
3 networks.
Yeah, that would be great.
He said, then we were all on the same page. Yeah.
Right.
Of course we were.
There's two things the president could do to change things subtly and get over 50% this year. Number one, do something bipartisan, even if it ticks off Republicans. And number two, let other Republicans do some of the fighting for him, because he has not had anybody in his corner early. But really, from August on, more and more lawmakers are getting into, including Mitch McConnell, fighting for him and saying that was unfair and let me do this. Let me be at the tip of the spear for a while. If he could back off and let some other people take some of the fire, he'll begin to get closer and closer to 50%.
I think you're right, but I also think it runs so contrary to his nature.
I agree.
Yeah.
You know,
It's just not who he
like
is.
that's hard for him to delegate. I think he's good, and this is why he likes having so many generals around him, because he's good at delegating the policy stuff, the foreign policy and national security that may not be as natural to him as some of the economic stuff. But when it comes to fighting and picking fights, I think he feels like he does it better than anyone else.
With the media, it's a strategy because
Yes.
the media is highly unpopular, and he knows that when he attacks them, there's a lot of people who like it because the media is unpopular.
But sometimes he backs off, like Eminem, for example. He thought for sure he's going to go after this kid. No, I'm not going to touch
And
him.
it
likes his
drove
music.
Eminem crazy.
Right.
Eminem
And-
was so mad.
Right. And if Eminem's mad, I'm mad. I've said
That's your
how we think I am.
motto. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we call him 8 Mile Kill Me.
Right, which is it's a longer nickname than my name, which is a nickname
true.
should be shorter by nature.
Yeah, well, sometimes.
Right.
President Trump, El Presidente, not happy with China today. He says the country has been caught red-handed doing something not good with North Korea. What is that? How nefarious? We'll tell you next.
What does that mean?
Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away.
Well, as tensions heighten with North Korea, the Trump administration has stepped up pressure on our international partners this year to isolate the rogue regime. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson notes in a new op-ed, our peaceful pressure campaign has cut off roughly 90% of the North's export revenue, much of which is used to fund the development of illegal weapons. But China could and should do more, he says. Our spy satellites have captured photos of Chinese ships illegally selling oil to North Korean boats more than 24 times since October. China has declined to confirm it, but President Trump did today, tweeting, caught red-handed, very disappointed that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korea problem if this continues to happen. Marie, isn't a lot of the basis of why we can't come to a solution with China on the North Korea problem based on a lack of trust between China and the U.S.?
I think it's a lack of trust, but it's also a lack of interests that are on the same page. China doesn't have all of the same interests that we do. Sure, they don't want North Korea to be able to launch nuclear weapons all around the world, but they also don't want war on the peninsula. They don't want a totally imploding North Korea where there's refugees flowing across the Chinese border. They have economic interests as well. So part of the goal has to be convincing China that our interests are the same and really putting some teeth behind this to get them more on board. Because at the end of the day, sanctions are not going to end North Korea's nuclear program. It is going to take much more pressure from countries like China, like Russia, and others to really get some better solution.
You talk about China not wanting war on the peninsula, which is true. They also don't want, they see this as an expansion of U.S. power on the peninsula as well.
Absolutely.
But I was in a meeting, Kennedy, 2 weeks ago with the senior national security advisor at the White House, who made it pretty clear that we're on the path to war if things don't change soon. I mean, the diplomatic options now are pretty limited.
Yeah, and tonight on my show, I'm going to interview Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, and he's going to talk about their biological warfare and anthrax-tipped missiles. And, you know, it's really scary that they have all of these capabilities. What's really tragic is the North Korean people are the ones who suffer because, you know, cheap, filthy oil is actually quite expensive.
Right.
And they're taking all of the money they have to buy all of this stuff on the black market. China's a state-run economy. You know, this is not a truly free market economy. Therefore, if they want to crack down on some of these banks and ships and companies who are supplying North Korea with this kind of oil, they absolutely could do that. And they're not. And, you know, we need to force this to more of a diplomatic head with China because no one wants war.
And the plans in place.
Absolutely no one.
The plans in place to do that. The sanctions are going to come down, and trade restrictions are going to come down on China. And our goal right now, behind the scenes, we're working on it to get Europe involved. So you got to get Europe and the U.S. And there's going to be some blowback that we're going to feel in our prices and some of our trade and some of our corporations and companies are going to feel this when it comes to it. But we have to go ahead and do it. And that's going to be our clampdown. And on top of that, the more you build up our military presence there, the more uncomfortable China gets.
Yeah.
This is the last thing they want.
Can I just say something really quickly to that point? There are a lot of our allies in Western Europe. You know, when we talk about the North Korean deal, or sorry, the Iran deal, They want us to stay in the Iran deal. And if they're going to back us on more North Korean sanctions and putting pressure as an ally bloc against China, they're going to, I think, force this president to stay in that Iran deal, because I don't think you can have it both ways.
Yeah, Tom, China's doing what China does, and they're actually saying this didn't happen at all, even though we have photos of them selling
China's
oil.
lying to us.
They're
I don't believe
this
it.
Didn't happen.
Maybe it's their unelected leadership that is known for lying. Maybe that's it. We shouldn't be surprised. I just love that. This is modern presidential. Remember when President Trump tweeted out, I'm not presidential, I'm modern presidential? I mean, when you think about this, it is
I missed that one, actually.
He said, well, this is his Twitter. He says his Twitter is modern. He's redefined the presidency, and he's telling us that. This is amazing that the president is tweeting out, liar, liar. Look, he's showing and he's calling them, what did he say? He caught red-handed? I love this. This is the presidential Twitter
Double
that I like.
entendre.
Well, the
Well
problem
done.
is the U.S. Treasury released the pictures. So he didn't have to wait for South Korean newspapers to publish them, I hope. I hope he got at least a glimpse of them last week.
But
sure he
if
did.
we are going to have some sort of diplomatic talks, which everyone agrees has to still be an option because nobody wants war, then I do think that the president just needs to be careful because they're so sensitive. Rex Tillerson writes this very well-crafted op-ed, and then Donald Trump tweets, and it's almost like, who's really speaking for the administration here? They just got to get on this.
But what about those talks, though? Because the Chinese government argues that North Korea and the U.S. should be speaking directly, that we are asking China to do too much when it comes to political influence they don't have in North Korea, while also asking them for economic sanctions on North Korea. What about opening up that door?
Let me ask
for
you
direct
this, though.
talks?
If Canada were popping off and threatening us with biological weapons and, pointing missiles at us, would we be asking China to run point? Absolutely not.
Right.
And it's the same thing geographically with China. I understand they want regional dominance. I get that they want global dominance, but it's going to be really hard if they do find themselves in a trade war. And I think in this instance, the United States economically certainly has the upper hand. We just have Rex Tillerson is great. Sexy Rexy, I get it. But Nikki Haley has done a better job as a diplomat.
On everything.
Right.
And we need someone who is more aligned with the president in this arena if we are going to actually solve this problem with China. I don't think Rex Tillerson
But
can
real
handle
quick,
it.
I think that if Canada was threatening China, China would ask us to help them with Canada. We are asking We're asking China to help with North Korea because they're closest, have
And
the
it's
most
a diplomatic
influence.
solution.
But that, I
But
think,
we
is
should be talking. We should be talking directly. This is such a pressing national security issue. In 2018,
They have to earn
it's
it.
going to be
They
at the
can't be
top of the
trusted.
list.
For 40 years, they couldn't be
If they
trusted.
can't be trusted, we need to sit down face to face with them and not just rely on China to do it. We need to be at that table. That's how you have leverage and pressure people directly.
We can't trust what they do or what they say. That's the problem.
Well, you don't negotiate with your friends. You negotiate with your enemies.
I think we solved the problem.
Right
North
here.
Korea. It's all good.
We did it.
Mark
Going
off.
to the UN tomorrow.
Here we go.
Getting some new sanctions.
Crossing off sea.
All right. High drama again in Alabama. Roy Moore still refusing to accept the outcome of the Senate race that he lost officially today. Next.
Well, it's official. Democrat Doug Jones is indeed the winner of the long, drawn-out Alabama Senate race. The contest was certified today, despite an attempt by Republican Roy Moore to stop it. A circuit judge denied Moore's request for a restraining order, alleging mass voter fraud. Alabama Secretary of State defended the integrity of the election on Fox News this afternoon. Take a look.
People are entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And the facts are that as of today, by the time I came on the air with you, we had had 118 instances of alleged voter fraud or fraudulent activity or irregularities that had occurred in this election. We have currently adjudicated 85 of those, which means that 33 are still outstanding. We will follow through until they've all been properly adjudicated. What we want people to know is that their votes have been counted and that the election process in the state of Alabama has integrity and credibility, which is what they expect and what they should be demanding and what we are providing.
Well, a spokesperson for Jones calls Moore's action a, quote, desperate attempt to subvert the will of the people. Jones will be sworn in by Vice President Mike Pence next Wednesday. Okay, Katie, I'm coming to you on this first. Didn't this feel like the Senate election that will never end?
It's like, okay, so he's officially the loser today. He was officially the loser on Election Day, and he should have conceded a long time ago. And him not conceding is the most Roy Moore thing that Roy Moore can do. And if they want to talk about voter fraud can be an issue in elections. That is true. However, it's not the case here. 22,800 people wrote in other people that weren't for Roy Moore.
And that was the difference.
Including Nick Saban,
it was a larger margin of write-ins than there was between Doug Jones and Roy Moore. Get over it. You're making everybody look bad. You're a sore loser, and go home.
Absolutely. Kennedy, so in January, Mike Pence will swear in Doug Jones, and Mitch McConnell will have a 1-vote margin. What does that mean?
Of any of the Democratic senators that are more likely to cross the aisle and vote with the president, I would say in order to preserve his senatorial perch, Doug Jones is going to do just that in some of these safe areas like we've talked about, like infrastructure. And I would have been disappointed if Roy Moore had conceded.
Should he ride out on a horse like he rode in on one?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, he should have an entire stable of crazy horses just to ride around the state on, because this election has been a huge distraction for both parties. It's been absolutely insane. And hopefully there are other parts of the country and other states where they've looked at this and sort of internalized and said to themselves, we have to run different types of candidates. And, you know, a lot of the issues that he's raised about, you know, voter fraud and fraud experts say, it's like, what are you, an infomercial for the mentally ill?
Right. But I'll say there is something stranger to come out of this portion of the election, and that is that Roy Moore chose post-election, his loss, to go get a polygraph to prove his innocence.
Right.
And then he says, let's have it, now that we're done, let's have a polygraph, because it turns out I don't have it with me, but I passed. So he passed his own polygraph, and he's
Is it in the same file as OJ's?
Possibly. I have not. It's amazing that OJ got out of prison, and we have not heard from him, because more controversial things have happened since he's gotten out.
Yeah, we might want to check in on that.
But I am a little astounded about what happened.
Do you think, Tom, it's going to Kennedy's point, do you think the Republican Party or the Democratic Party will look at this and say, hey, maybe we need to make sure we don't nominate people who are crazy?
Well, listen, I just hope that other politicians they don't refrain from riding their horses to the polls. I think that's a great way to get to the polls.
Right.
It is eco-friendly.
I mean, we don't want to slander people who like to ride horses to the polls, okay? That wasn't his main problem.
That's a good point.
No one's anti-horse poll riding here.
Yes. You know what the good news out of this election was?
Oh, please tell us.
All of these hard, draconian voter laws, voter ID laws, they're going to, it's going to tamp down minority turnout. Minority turnout was huge. These laws are fine. Right. Minorities have no problem getting to the polls. They should stop complaining about these draconian laws, because Alabama has some of the toughest voter laws. So they work just fine, and they don't repress voters.
Listen, a lot of people who know Roy Moore say he's a great guy, a principled guy, so I don't mean to be negative towards him.
Go ahead. You're allowed to be.
No, because I've never met him, never interviewed him. He didn't do any interviews the weekend before. You got to work. You don't go to a football game. He didn't work. You have to sit there and work 23 hours over the last 36 in order to win. Doug Jones did it. He didn't. He lost by 1%. You can't leave anything in the tank. Look at what President Trump did. He outworked Hillary Clinton to the end. His only disappointment was he goes, I didn't know I was so close in Minnesota. He said, I would have went there one more time. I would have had Minnesota, too. Right. That's the attitude you have to have. You can't run from interviews either. He ran from interviews.
You're right. And Doug Jones, give him credit. He ran a good campaign. He was a candidate. Like I always say, Democrats need to find candidates who match the districts or who match states.
Does he match Alabama? It's a very Republican state.
Yes. Right.
So you agree with me that he's more likely to flip and cross the aisle than people like Joe Manchin, Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, and some of the other Democrats who are in, red states.
Red states, yeah. I think he's in that camp. Absolutely. Because they found a candidate who was credible, he was respected in the state, and he was able to run a good campaign.
Not that much.
Well, I think Doug Jones
I don't want to give him too much credit.
Doug Jones is pretty
You think they're going to kick him out in 2020 when his term is up?
But I think as we look to the end of 2017, one of the stories that we will be very happy to never talk about again is the Alabama Senate election. Yeah. Can everyone agree on that?
It's a lesson to Republicans that no seat is too red not to keep.
That's right.
Jeff Sessions' Senate seat, and now it belongs to
And states can flip. States can flip in not a long amount of time. I mean, Bill Clinton won Louisiana. So I think that everyone going into this election needs to keep that in mind.
Right. The only thing I would like to add to Virginia and Alabama, everyone says, well, there are aberrations, whatever. The only thing that keeps on coming through is turnout. Democrats are getting the turnout because they're motivated. If Republicans have the money and they think they have the candidate, if they don't go out to the polls and motivate, they're going to find themselves losing.
It turns out voting wins elections.
That's
weird.
Weird. Oh, man.
Do you have a pen? Write that down.
Write it down.
Write it down. It's a fact.
Well, switching gears, coming up to an interesting new gadget for those in love and thinking of popping the question maybe on New Year's Eve. Shalou here knows a thing or two about proposals, so he'll fill you in next. Stay tuned.
Country roads take me home to the place
You can't predict the market, but through good times and bad, at T. Rowe Price, we've helped our...
The cell phone case with a built-in ring box. Now when you get down on one knee to propose, you can cherish your fiancé's reaction forever. Never forget the beautiful moment she said I do. And share it with everyone on social media. RockShox, the best moment from the worst angle.
The reactions you can now capture when you pop the question to your squeeze. A new device brings convenience to your big moment. A company called RockShox makes a phone case that can hide your engagement ring, and then when the time is right, you just get on your knee, press record, and show her the bling. Let's just hope you can get the answer that you want. I love technology, Kennedy.
I do too.
I think this is great. It's a great item that it's old the second you get engaged. You can toss it in the trash.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it's not too expensive. Hopefully it's not like $250.
It's like $39.95.
Lord knows young men these days and age have to spend a lot of money on that ring.
Yes.
Because it is going on social media where everyone is going to contrast and compare.
And judge.
And with absolutely. And with so many people, if it doesn't go on Instagram immediately, it didn't happen.
Right.
So,
That's the shame. I think that there is too much, Brian. You know, everything is online. I'm a traditionalist. You know, when I proposed, it was in complete darkness. I didn't even want to. I didn't want to see her expression.
We know it was an arranged marriage. So it really doesn't.
I did it by the moonlight. It wasn't late at night.
Well, put it this way: to your thing, people spend on average $5,000 on a ring. Okay, so you have to be ready to spend $5,000.
Yeah.
Number two is, I've never seen something so scripted about a spontaneous moment. I think this is something. I think this is. I thought this was half joke, half real. I wasn't sure if this is a mockery. Is this really happening?
I think so.
I think it's half
happening.
joke, half. I think it is half joke. I think it's half real.
I could look on Amazon right now and see if it's available.
It is. You can buy them. It's a real thing.
People propose at baseball games or football games and they put you up on the Jumbotron, it's like, oh God, please say yes. Like there have been times when it's just
She's
too
like,
public.
You should not do these things.
I went to a fancy restaurant overlooking Lake Tahoe. And it's just a beautiful location. It was in one of the casinos, so it was pretty high up. And the view was just stunning. The food was fantastic. And I asked the waiter if people ever proposed. He said, yes, we had a man who invited his family and his girlfriend's family. He got down on one knee and proposed in this beautiful setting. And she said no.
Wow. It's also men who put it in food. Like, if you buy me a diamond, I don't want it in ice cream.
Right.
Please.
Or mashed potatoes.
Or mashed potatoes. The common engagement food.
That's if you really want to crack
you want your face, a big close-up of your face?
You never do the upshot on the iPhone. That's just a really bad idea.
That's a self-help trick.
And I think to be a little bit sentimental here, some things should be private and between you and your significant other. And I think that people forget now in the days of commercialization, which is not a bad thing. However, it's not about the wedding. It's not about the proposal. It's about the marriage. And I think too many people forget about that.
Yeah, Tom
so just
forgets
a nice
about it all the
reminder.
time. He's focused still on his wedding. Work is on the relationship, Tom. And here's the key. This is why our producers are brilliant. Do you know that more engagements happen on Christmas Eve and Christmas than any other time?
Really?
That's why this talking point
And they're going to happen more this year, maybe because of that infomercial we just did for that dumb device. Okay, one more thing is up next.
RockShox! One more thing left on my rundown. In fact, it's called One More Thing. And let's begin with Katie. What have you chosen, Katie? Tell us.
Country music star Luke Bryan may have already won his wife Caroline's heart, but he also wins the award for Best Christmas Present. So what did he give her? Watch this.
All right, here's your purses. Your two purses. Take your blindfolds off.
Oh, my God! Yes, those are two baby kangaroos. They're baby-roos, and they're named Margot and Todd, and are the latest addition to his wife's project, Brett's Barn, which is a tribute to their niece, who sadly died at 7 months old, which is very sweet. The barn is full of rescue animals, and they plan to partner with local charities to have kids visiting the animals. So Margot and Todd are now part of the Luke Bryan family, and they look very, very happy.
But I will say kangaroos tend to be dangerous. They grow up and punch you. I believe.
And they,
well, they
some
might
of them, there's
swing
some,
at
there's
it.
some
Wait a minute,
species of
they're
kangaroo that are
inferring
very
now,
tall,
Brian.
and they kick you with their feet, not punch with their little T-Rex
Exactly.
arms.
I have a friend who has a wallaby, actually. which is small.
T-Rex arms. Kangaroos have T-Rex arms. More still breaking news here. Tom.
It's the hashtag "It's So Cold" is trending on Twitter. It's cold almost everywhere these days. But check out how this father and daughter dealt with the cold. They hop out of the hot tub. Take a look at this video.
No!
Oh, hey! What happened to the snow angels?
I love that video.
That
Kennedy,
couldn't be more
you've probably
unhealthy.
done that. Brian, it's not unhealthy. Everyone on Twitter is saying that's dangerous. What a bad dad. It's great fun. I bet you
One
do
of the
that,
best
Kennedy.
things you can do for your lymphatic system.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely. Hot to
Okay,
cold, hot to
good.
cold.
I'm going to think about doing that. Kennedy.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. You know that women in Hollywood are planning on making a social statement at this year's Golden Globes. Many of them, including Academy Award winners Jessica Chastain and Meryl Streep, plan on wearing black to the awards ceremony, and their very, very brave male counterparts, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnston, the former Mr. Taylor Swift, Tom Hiddleston, and Armie Hammer, who played the Winklevoss twins in The Social Network. Just one guy played both. They're all going to listen to this. It's so brave. The guys are going to be wearing black too.
For women.
Have you ever heard of a man wearing black to an award show? What a brave, incredible man they're
Profiles
making.
and courage.
Oh, just I have
All
to
right.
wipe the sentimental tears.
Take that, Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Marie.
Pavin Smith was drafted by the Arizona Diamondbacks in June with a $5 million signing bonus. And Smith wanted to thank his parents for supporting him all the way and decided to pay off their mortgage to show his appreciation. Take a look at this video when they found out.
Thank you for raising me in a great home filled with love. Because of all the sacrifices you made to get me where I am, I want our family home to be yours. So you can't do that.
He paid off their mortgage.
He did, and Pavin and the family appeared this morning on Fox and Friends with Brian. If you missed it, check it out. It was a good interview.
Really cool. And finally, special thanks to a magnolia tree over 200 years old. It was in front of the White House. Churchill and FDR talked about it. Nixon walked by it. Herbert Hoover ate under it. And it was planted by Andrew Jackson in honor of his wife
Hickory.
who passed away during the campaign, 1828 to 1837. They're only cutting out part of it. Don't blame Melania. An arboretum expert or a tree expert told her to do it. And Andrew Jackson lives on, just not as big. Pieces of that are being taken off, and they're going to be planted elsewhere on the property and elsewhere at the
thank
Hermitage.
goodness.
So don't panic, America.
And read Brian Kilmeade's great book.
Also made of wood.
On Andrew Jackson.
Based on paper. Thank you very much. Hey, don't ever miss an episode of The Five, because there's a quiz at the end of every day. And make sure to use your DVR, because what else would you use it for? Now it's time to go to Mike Emanuel. He's my only friend.
Hey, Brian, aren't you usually taking a nappy poo this time of day?
Yes, I really am. That's why it didn't make much sense, Mike.
Well, thanks for staying awake.